Good morning, everybody. If you would like to take your seats. Look at this. In real life events happening again. It's amazing. Quite emotional. So welcome, everybody, to our Ignite event. Welcome to the Conduit Club. Just shortly, I'll be handing over to the Queen of Ignite, Shah, who will be taking you through some housekeeping stuff. My name's Rich Strachan. I'm the MD at Three-Sided Cube. And I just want to give you a bit of a sort of intro to why we're sort of here today. So Three-Sided Cube, for those of you that don't know, is a software development house, very mission-led. We want to change millions of people's lives for the better. And it's something that we do on a kind of daily basis. We work with the UN to connect their global supporters with refugees around the world through the UNHCR. Work with the American Red Cross to deliver first aid information and keep people safe in times of natural disasters in 80-odd countries, and it's been translated into 55 languages. We help people in the indigenous people in forests around the world, in like Indonesia and Madagascar, to track deforestation and give them a kind of sense of power to help battle the people that are sort of savaging their habitats. And we do all of that through the power of software and technology. It's a great leveler for people. So we know the power that we can have to make a change. And it's something that we're immensely proud of. But that is not something that we get to do alone. We do that because of the clients that we work with. It's not something that one individual kind of organization can do. We work with some big organizations that help us do that. And that is where Ignite comes from. That idea of collaboration and transparency is what it takes to solve the big problems. And climate change, sustainable living, is a pretty big problem that we need to solve. There's none bigger that we've ever faced. So it's going to take a real effort from lots of different organizations and people and like-minded individuals. And if there's one thing that we want to happen today, it's that you guys, room full of change makers that are here today, you'll all have ideas, you'll all be passionate about making that difference. And what we want to do is ignite that change and create an atmosphere that means that you guys can cross-pollinate ideas and make the difference that we hope we can make. Shah's going to be talking to you about a bit of housekeeping stuff, and we're going to be talking about a report that we've done recently. So I will, without further ado, hand over to Shah, the Queen of Ignite. Here she is.
Thank you. Oh, wow. I get all the glamorous stuff like the housekeeping. So, without further ado, we're going to come. Yeah, okay, cool. So schedule today. So hopefully everyone's arrived and had a cup of coffee and all raring to go. Obviously, you're sort of hearing from myself and Rich around us introducing ourselves. We've then got the state of play of Professor Mark Maslin. We will then be going into our inspirational panel discussion. We'll then be doing a bit of a wrap-up, and then please do stay for the delicious lunch and networking. As Rich mentioned, that's what it's all about, being able to connect with like-minded people. So please do stay, have a chat. There's also a glass of wine in it, so all good stuff. So I've had to write these bits down, but housekeeping. So toilets are to the left, just over here if you need them. Wi-Fi is actually the Conduit members, and the password is welcome back. We have got streaming and photos today, so just so you're aware that's going on, and also we can send that to you after if you want to replay all of this. We've got a lot going on social today, so you can use the hashtag #BridgingTheGap, and please do follow us on social, so at Three-Sided Cube on Instagram and Twitter, and obviously LinkedIn. And then finally, if you've got any questions, please use Slido. So these we'll be interrupting, but after every session we'll be doing some questions, so please do add them, or if you want to shout out, go for it. Just also want to say hi to everyone at home that's watching online that couldn't, unfortunately, make it today. Hooray for hybrid events. Cool. So, as Rich mentioned, what we sort of want to talk about today is our new report, Bridging the Gap. So this is launching today. You are the first people we're talking to about it, which is really exciting. And what we did is we wanted to sort of understand consumer views around sustainability. So we commissioned a survey of 2,000 nationally representative consumers to look at whether they are carrying out sustainable intentions. So, what do we actually mean by the intention-action gap? So this is, a lot of people have sustainable intentions, whether you want to become vegan, you want to buy less plastic, you want to shop in a zero-waste shop, for example. So a lot of people have those intentions, but actually following through with those intentions, there is a big gap in between, and there's that failure to do so. So from our research, we found that actually 32% of our respondents were failing to have that intention through to action. So if you think about that in terms of the UK, there's around 55 million UK adults. So that gap actually affects just over 17 million UK adults. So it's a pretty big gap. There's a really, really key opportunity there. And also, that's actually 1 in 3 people, which is pretty scary. So, here we go. So why don't people act more sustainably? So there's lots of different reasons, but the main ones we saw from our research were cost, motivation, and convenience, something that I'm sure has affected all of us in the room. And what we wanted to do with this research was look at the opportunity there is to close that gap. So further ado, I'll be passing back to Richard Strachan. There you go.
Yeah, so when we got that research back, it was actually quite crazy to think 17.5 million people are there that want to behave sustainably, want to make the difference. They understand the kind of situation that the planet's in, but when it comes to the point of action, they're not actually doing it. And that, for us, feels like really low-hanging fruit. That's something where we can affect real change there. If we could get that cohort of people, a third of the population, 1 in 3 people. So if you think about it when you go to the supermarket and you're sort of stood there in the queue, there will be 1 out of every 3 people in that supermarket will have gone in there with the intention to behave sustainably. That's what they want to do. And yet they're walking out with a trolley full of the same old stuff that's getting dumped in landfill and causing all the problems that we have today. So what we've looked at here is the various barriers, and then some different technology that can do it. Now, technology isn't the only answer to this, but we are a technology company, so it does have a certain bent towards that. So cost is a really interesting one. Yeah, people think cost. This is going to cost me more to behave more sustainably. And there's a whole world of stuff around the supply chain and how we can reduce costs there. But from a consumer point of view, all the technology already exists to educate people and make people aware that the cost isn't necessarily more expensive. Stuff like big data and geolocation gives the power of that information in the consumer's hand at the point of purchase. There's already plenty of technology out there already, plenty of applications that will show you alternative purchases. Why not do that for a more sustainable option? Or show the real cost, the long-term cost of that choice. Fast fashion's a really interesting world for that. People think that cheap pair of shoes that they buy or that cheap t-shirt they buy is cheaper. The fact is they have to replace it every 2 weeks. So actually over time, 6 months, a year, 2 years, that actual real-term, long-term cost is actually greater. And we can show people that at the point of purchase through technologies that they really do exist already. And it's none of this is kind of rocket science. It's just getting the right people together to understand that data, provide the data, and then having people that can then present that data at the point of purchase. So motivation's a really, really interesting one. Motivation's a key one for climate. It's one of the biggest issues you've got out there because the way that behaviour change works in most kind of technologies and most the ways human beings learn things is they change their behaviour and then they get a positive reaction to that and they like that and they do it again. We're pretty simple creatures, really. We're not too far away from the rats that hit their nose on the thing to get the pill. It's that kind of dopamine reaction. That's what people enjoy doing. Really difficult to do with climate change, because if I do my recycling properly and sort it all wonderfully every day, that doesn't mean that suddenly California stops burning or there's another polar bear that exists. It doesn't work like that. So how do we show people the impact of their choices that they're making? Well, there's technology out there again that already works. You've probably read a bit about it at the moment. So mixed reality, augmented reality is something that's been the coming thing for many years. But any of you that have been watching the hyperverse stuff, and particularly the stuff Facebook are talking about, and frankly, I can't think of a worse place than Mark Zuckerberg's hyperverse to live in for the rest of my life. But that technology is coming to fruition now, and it's something that's there. Brilliant. It's really immersive technology. It can literally take you to alternative realities. So you can show people the choice they make, that sustainable action. We can show them what impacts that can have over a long term in a real world. So the technology, again, exists and is getting cheaper all the time. And then convenience is a really interesting one. So convenience is a problem that people come up with. It's not convenience to do this. There's too much friction. If you look at other areas, so car insurance or other those banal, horrible things that everybody has to do every day, that is now a frictionless activity because of technology. It's been funded properly by banks. You have open data. It's very easy to get a payday loan or get your insurance or whatever it is to do, because they're motivated financially to be able to create these integrated systems that allow them to do it. But there's no reason why we can't create the same sort of frictionless experience to behaving more sustainably. Really interestingly, I will name check Phil at the back there. He's just done a trial with the Welsh Government around curbside DRS, so deposit return scheme. And that's all about taking the friction out of the user's hand. So the user doesn't have to, when they recycle their bottle, take it back to the supermarket, put it into the machine and get the 20p out. There's a whole load of actions in that. What Polytag are trying to do and the Welsh Government are trying to do is take that friction away. So you just put it in your curbside and you still get that deposit back to you. So the technology is already happening. It's just making this a reality. And if you speak to Phil about it, there's a whole world of actors involved in that aren't software partners, but it's policy, manufacturing, packaging, design, all those different skill sets which we've all got in this room that can work together to make that sort of thing a reality. So really, I know there's a lot of people in here that have these ideas of how to do stuff. Technology bit's kind of easy, really, and is easy to get out of the way. It's the collaboration and the transparency that will really get us where we're going to go. So, without further ado, I will introduce you to our key speaker, Mark Maslin. So Mark has recently written a book, How to Save the Planet. And the way Mark has written that book, I'm sure, sorry. It sounded a good title. What's brilliant about Mark's book, and I don't want to embarrass him, but what's brilliant about Mark's book is that it's not, and I'm not going to steal your thunder because I'm sure you're going to talk about it, but it's written in a different way. So Mark's thought about how to communicate this to actually change people's behaviour. It's not another weighty tome about the perils of the planet that you have to plough through. You've done one of those already, right? Yeah. So this, no, but this is written in a completely different way, which is much better. I find it for somebody with my attention span. It's a much better way, I think, of communicating it. So it's looking at different ways of communicating it to instill action. So here you go, Mark. That you come. Brilliant. Well done,
Thank you very much. I'm going to have to say, after introductions like that, I feel like it's all going to be downhill, so I apologise. I also apologise that my deep, sexy voice is because I've got man flu. And yes, I will be whining about it for the next half an hour, okay? Usually I sound like Daffy Duck. Right. So what I want to do for you is set the picture, because you are all at the cutting edge of sustainability, but occasionally you'll get those things where people will go, yeah, but climate change isn't real, or it's not as bad, or the best one, of course, is, oh, net zero is going to cost us too much money. And of course, strangely enough, the Global Warming Policy Foundation has reinvented itself as net zero watch, okay? So be careful because they will be starting to say it's too expensive to save the planet. So I love this picture, okay? I love this cartoon. It's in another one of my books. Basically, we're all incredibly worried about COVID, flattening the curve. And I love this because it's symbolic, which is, yes, we've had this incredible global pandemic, but we're also facing a huge crisis of the climate, which is literally coming over the hill behind us. But I want to reassure you, okay, the science of climate change is 150 years old. So when everybody says to you, oh, the climate science isn't really quite set, yeah, no, I'm sorry, they got it right 150 years ago. And the first person is Eunice Foote. So she was an American scientist, she was a feminist activist, she was trying to get the vote for women, and she did this incredible experiment, very simple. She took some test tubes, sealed them up with a thermometer in, one had air, one had CO2 in, and left them out in the sunshine. And guess what? The one with the CO2 warmed up quicker, got to a higher temperature, and cooled down. Tick. The greenhouse effect was discovered. The only slight downside was then a male professor had to present her results at the conference. Luckily, things have moved on. 5 years later, John Tyndall in London built this equipment and actually was able to measure that effect, and therefore was able to show that water vapor is the main greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, followed by CO2, methane, nitrous oxides, and those nasty things like CFCs. And he was able to show that actually water vapor was the major greenhouse gas that was keeping the planet warm for life. So, what is climate change? And I feel occasionally when I say this, it's just simple physics that I should be doing a Brian Cox, looking at the planets, and it's simple physics. But it really is. So if you think about it, the sun's energy is, and the sun has come out perfectly timed for me, it's all light energy. There's a little bit of heat, a little bit of UV. The great thing is the UV is absorbed by ozone, so that means we don't get skin cancer, which is great. However, most of it's light. So if you can just imagine that you're sitting on a nice tropical beach, you're not having to listen to me and my croaky voice, you're sitting on that beach, soaking up those rays with a decent cocktail, really important. What do you feel? Hot. The reason being because that light hits you, it converts to heat, and your body then radiates it back out. Exactly happens to the Earth. So about a third of that sunlight reflects straight back into space, okay? Off white clouds, off of white ice sheets. The rest is absorbed by the Earth, and that heat comes out. And it's that heat that is absorbed by greenhouse gases and just keeps the actual sort of like planet a little bit warmer than it would be. Strip them all out, including the water vapor, temperatures would drop by about 35 degrees Celsius. Yeah, so that means an English summer would be about -20, and an English winter would be about -35, okay? Greenhouse gases, good, okay? Yeah. However, we've been putting CO2 into the atmosphere through our industrial revolution. And this was discovered in 1938. So Guy Callender, a Brit-Canadian amateur meteorologist, showed that by looking at the weather stations around the world, and there were about 147 at that point, he could see that there was a distinct warming of the atmosphere by 1938, and he was able to link it to a couple of CO2 measurements that said CO2 went up. So we knew about it in 1938. There's even an article from, I think it's 1912, suggesting that the warming was due to CO2. So this is the famous Keeling Curve, which basically just keeps going up because, of course, we're pumping more and more CO2 into the atmosphere due to our industrial energy production and also for land use and deforestation. So at the moment, we've pumped an extra 50% of CO2 into the atmosphere compared with pre-industrial times, and it's probably the highest level we've had for 3 million years. So greenhouse gases in ice cores give us a little bit of the history. So this is my colleagues who basically have to work in -5 labs. I'm not doing that, okay? I'm much more of a tropical person. And the great thing about ice cores is they have air bubbles trapped in them. So when you slice them up, if you can take the air out, you're measuring ancient air. And so therefore you can see the amount of methane that goes up and down with the ice ages, CO2 up and down, and it's basically about 200 parts per million, hits about 280 during a normal interglacial, and then suddenly, that was not as dramatic as I thought it was going to be. There's a bit of a pause there. As you can see, we've basically almost tripled methane, and we've increased CO2 by 50%. So this is the natural cycles, and this is what we've done. So, can we see any effects of climate change? Because that's one of the other things people go, oh, you know, there's some extreme weather events, but has anything really changed? You know, I remember it was hot in '76. I'll come back to that. Oh, so there are, look. Northern Hemisphere snow cover. So any of you who adore skiing, yeah, that's unfortunately going to be problematic because, of course, we've been losing snow, and many of the actual snow ranges actually now start to actually produce artificial snow at huge energy costs. So we also, summer sea ice. Well, we know summer sea ice in the Arctic is reducing because, of course, David Haberburn of the BBC keeps going up there every summer and goes, look, it's melting. I think it's his little sort of like summer holiday. He goes, I'm going to the Arctic again, just with the BBC. The one that's probably, for me, as a scientist, most scary is the heat content of the upper ocean. Yeah, I know, it sounds as dull as dishwater. But if you think about it, the ocean covers 70% of the world's surface, and it has a really slow heat inertia. So if that's warming up, that's really worrying. And then, of course, sea level change has gone up by about 24 centimeters in the last 100 years. Okay, so that's lots of real evidence for climate change. And this is the much more noisy air temperature. So as you can see, strong warming through the 1880s to the 1940s. There's a sort of plateau. And then from 1960 onwards, we have this strong warming. 2020 was the joint warmest year on record with 2016. And yeah, the great thing is that sort of like most of you, you look at graphs and you're going, yeah, if it's not numbers and me making profit, I'm not sure I understand it. So Ed Hawkins, brilliant climatologist from Reading University, made climate stripes. So what he did was he said, well, hang on, let's just convert this into a color from blue to red. And this is this wonderful thing. Bit of a side story. He also did these climate spirals that spiral out, starting from 1880, with each of the months getting warmer and warmer for the world. And somebody phoned him up and went, Ed, you've got to turn the TV on. He goes, why? He said, it's the beginning. It's the beginning of the sort of like Rio Olympics. And he said, yeah, why do I want to open, what's the opening show? Your climate spiral is right in the middle of the Olympics. So Ed, luckily, had put this all open access. But, of course, had they actually asked him? No! So he found out firsthand when it was on the news. Right, but this is London, okay? So this is the temperature stripes for London, showing you the massive warming of about 1.6 degrees that occurred over the last 150 years, actually 170 years. But guess what? This is a marketing person's dream, okay? Look, you can have a tie, okay? You can have a Tesla. Hey, look, if you can afford a Tesla, you can definitely afford to wrap it, okay? T-shirts, leggings, and what's really interesting is in the US, certain politicians of a certain party have pledge pins which have the climate stripes on them. You may not notice that very subtly, the BBC, whenever they have a climate change story, the top left is always the climate stripes, just to reinforce the notion that they are talking about climate change. So, what about the future? I'm a scientist, so I would love to have lots of different worlds that I can torture. You know, sort of like heat one up, cool one down, etc. Yeah, except we only have one planet, and I'm not allowed to play with it, so, which is really annoying. So what do? We have supercomputers. These are incredible, okay? And one of the key things is the science is so good. We understand thermodynamics. We understand laws of motion. We understand all the chemistry. We've done all that. And we also can do it in great detail. You know, sort of, I put this up here. This is the first report that was published by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, in 1990. And a bit of a political joke. Yeah, guess what? UK was really part of Europe in those days. But now we've actually been able to get to much higher resolution. Basically, I'm going to just take this out because the computing power we have has gone astronomical, okay? But guess what? The results from 1990, 95, 2000, 2013, and now 2021, it's all the same. Because the ridiculous thing is you cannot change the laws of physics. And I can't do the Scottish accent. And the reason being is because you put greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, the Earth warms up. Doesn't matter how big or complicated your model is, that's still true. Right, moving on. So what is the future like? So the problem is the science is really good. The problem is, and I'm just going to do this. Yeah, you lot, okay? Guess what? Humans are a nightmare to predict into the future because, well, how many are there going to be on the planet by 2050? How much CO2 are you going to emit? What sort of economic systems are we going to have? And so therefore, we produce stories or scenarios of the future that allow us to show to policymakers what could happen. So we abandon all the climate policies we have at the moment, then we're looking at 4 to 5.5 degrees warming into the future. The current climate policies, if they are 100% successful, and you know policies are never 100% successful, then we're looking at 3.1 to 3.7. And then if we look at the pledges that were made in Paris in 2015, that could keep it to 2.6 to 3.2 degrees. Great. And then there are these two amazing political pieces of science, which is this is the pathway for 2 degrees, and this is the pathway for the aspirational target for 1.5. Now, the Paris Agreement was brilliant. I hate to say this, the French were absolutely amazing, incredibly Machiavellian, and got 196 countries to agree. But the least developed countries and the island nations were incredible because they slipped in to the main executive summary, not only that we should be aiming for 2 degrees, but there's an aspirational target for 1.5 degrees. And this allowed the scientists off the hook, and therefore we could then start talking about 1.5 degrees and net zero emissions. Before 2018, net zero was never in the lexicon. So, what are the effects of climate change? More extreme storms, floods, droughts, heat waves, and wildfires. I can literally just say, look at 2001. The scary thing about 2001 is most scientists are quite happy to go on record and go, for warming of 1.1 degrees, we would not expect these events to be happening now. Okay? So scientists are taking a step back going, oh, yeah, 2001, way too extreme. Our model's not sensitive enough. I mean, you had 49.5 degrees Celsius in Western Canada. And that's ridiculous. Okay? May lead to food and water insecurity. This, again, opens up Pandora's box because we actually produce enough food for 10 billion people. There's only 7.9 billion of us, so why are people, and there's about 800 million people that go to bed feeling hungry every night. Why is that? It's not because of the lack of availability of food, it's a lack of access because they don't have money. And then, of course, the other one that you'll always hear, migration and conflict. People migrate for very complicated reasons, and therefore climate change may be a threat multiplier that pushes more people to move. And conflict. We know by just looking at the news that conflict is actually due to many complicated reasons, and sometimes humans really don't need an excuse for conflict. But if you wanted one, then climate change and some of the impacts would make a good excuse, but not a cause. Okay, so I've hopefully really depressed you, and I'm going to go for a bit more depression, and then I'm going to try and lift you up, before sort of like you then have a fantastic panel. The UN Paris Agreement, again, hate to lord up the French, incredible, okay? Basically, we need to cut CO2 emissions to net zero in the middle of the century. To achieve this, and I love this understatement, we need the complete transformation of our energy generation, industry, infrastructure, and personal behaviors. Yeah, so not much then. Okay, right, okay. Thank you very much. I mean, it's brilliant to say that, but how do we collectively make that revolution happen? And I'm going to give you the real challenge, okay? Because I think we sometimes think, oh, yes, we can do this. We can just do recycling. This is the challenge. So this is the red line here. This is the emissions from both fossil fuels, industry, and land use. This is where we've got to, and this is what we've got to do. We have to get to net global zero by 2050. The quicker we do it, the easier the rest of the century will be. And why? Well, something us scientists don't actually tell you is that's great, because we're just trying to convince you to get to net zero, okay? And that's not really that worrying, because America has basically said they're going to get to net zero by 2050. UK and Europe are going net zero by 2050. And China says we will peak by 2030, and then we'll get to net zero by 2060. So the big three economies of the world are going net zero. But the thing we forget to tell you is then, to make sure you're at 1.5 degrees, we need to suck CO2 out for the rest of the century, okay? So it's not just getting to zero. After that, we need to keep sucking it out to make sure the planet stays at a proper level. Okay, so did COVID save us from climate change? And I suddenly realized I was kept saying to people, well, there was only a drop of our emissions of 7%. And I found that I was communicating it the wrong way. Because everyone, oh, there was a drop. Basically, now I turn around and go, our emissions in 2020, when we weren't flying, we weren't using a car, and we didn't feel we were doing anything, were 93% of what they were in the previous year. Which actually, if you go back, is basically 2006. Okay? And that really tells us something really important about global emissions. One, they're mainly from energy production around the world. Still a third of it comes from coal-fired power stations. Secondly, shipping stuff, moving goods around the world causes huge amounts of emissions. That doesn't stop just because we're sitting in our houses basically being self-isolating. And thirdly, agriculture. Agriculture continues to go because you're feeding 7.9 billion people. And those are the things that we have to actually focus on if we're going to solve this issue. So, win-win. So I am, and Richard very kindly introduced my book, I am obsessed with win-win. Everything that I suggest is always good for the planet, good for us, okay? You know, I'm a deeply selfish person, so I work on the principle that if we're going to do this, we should do it in the right way. And actually, it is not individuals, it is not sort of governments or corporations, it's all of us together. So government is absolutely essential, we need the corporations on side, and we need individuals, and it's the interaction between those three that is important. And actually, if you think about it, the Downdraw project, who put all of them together, all the possible solutions to remove emissions, if we do all those, it saves us $46 trillion. That's half the current world's GDP. So when you have certain politicians and certain people go, oh, it's going to cost us too much money, it really is, you just go, actually, it's going to save us money. Right. So, possible government actions. So I'm into actions because you lot are going to actually help us work out, these are the actions we're going to do. People don't want to do them or are unable to, you're going to work out how we can actually jump that gap. So we need to, for governments, support renewable energy. We need to tax fossil fuels, cut fossil fuel subsidies, support electric cars and public transport. Do you know how depressing it is to have to go onto public radio and say, actually, going by train is not necessarily in the UK better than driving a small petrol car, because actually we still use a lot of diesel trains because the government hasn't electrified everything. So there are some real interesting things. Carbon neutral buildings, retrofitting, reforest and rewilding, promote lower emissions farming, changing our diet, expanding our emissions trading schemes. So that's the government. And this is a piece of work that I did with a brilliant PhD student of mine. It's a bit out of date, 2018, 2019. But if you look at the green economy globally and you look at the supply chain that feeds it, it basically generates $10 trillion per year. Okay? So the green economy is here. It already is a huge part of the global economy. People just don't see it because it's so distributed through the economy. UK, sales were 328 billion and employed about 2 million people. And I love these wheel diagrams. Lucian was fantastic with them because as you can see, guess what? You can see all the incredible trade networks that occur within the green economy. Being sustainable in activity and caring about the economy actually is good for business. I support a lot of businesses through being on their corporate boards, and I also help out by actually, I even run my own company. And I'm just going to leave you here with this one. CDP said that corporations that actively manage and plan for climate change secure a 67% higher return than companies that refuse to actually send their stuff out. So, companies, set meaningful targets. Okay? You're not going to go carbon neutral overnight. Switch to 100% electricity. Engage employees. They're their most powerful ally in this. Use carbon neutral buildings. Offset emissions. Link your ambition to supply and value chain. Just look at what Microsoft are planning to do if you're thinking about doing that. And empower entrepreneurs to drive the green revolution. And I'm just looking at a whole bunch of them now. Yes, okay? You are my heroes. Okay, individuals, because I can't finish without actually talking about what we as individuals can do and how you can then engage and get people to do these actions. So, talk about it, okay? This is the greatest threat to humanity, and we're happy talking about sort of the Prime Minister's furniture choices, but we're not happy about talking about the greatest threat to humanity. Switch to a more vegetarian or vegan diet. That is such an easy win-win for everybody. Makes them healthier, makes your kids healthier. Switch to renewable energy supplier. Hey, guess what? If you didn't actually have gas, etc., that would be actually really useful if we had 100% renewables. We wouldn't be beholden to natural gas. Reduce consumption. Reduce, reuse, recycle. Use an electric car. Oh, by the way, come on. Yeah, see, they are. My talk does sort of link itself, you know. Stop flying, and if you must, then offset. And these are the really important ones. Divest your pension and investments from fossil fuels. A, you'll make a bigger return. B, you will also feel good about making money. Oh, protest and vote. And I just want to say, the biggest problem, and this is why today is so important, and so are you, because the problem is intentionality. We know, we all have friends, we all have relatives who really care about the planet, really want to do the right thing, but then when they're in the supermarket, it's suddenly, you know, you're confused by all the PR and marketing that's going on because you never know who's telling the truth. So there is this huge gap. Really quick story, because they are obviously going to throw me off very soon. I can tell them, they're going, get off. It's like, hey, look, Richard took longer, I'm going to take longer. So very quickly, Finland did a fantastic job. What they did was they said, everybody will be signed up to a renewable energy tariff. But, because we're a democracy, you can go in and switch to maybe a cheaper normal tariff if you want to. Guess what? 99% people just went, oh, yes, fine. So again, intentionality. If you do it for them, sometimes actually works. So basically, we all want to do good. Well, we know a few that don't. But we then fail to act on it. And hopefully, all of these wonderful facts are nicely in bullet points through my book, How to Save the Planet. And I hope this has helped. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Mark. As you know, I'm a big fan of the win-win solutions. And we're doing the first one by talking about it today. So there we go. Love that. I do have a couple of questions for you. Just a reminder as well, please do use Slido as much as possible, because that's where we're collating all the questions. The number is 557658, and it's bridging the gap. Okay, so I've got one question. So I see other countries being proactive in narrowing the gap with proper legislation and government support. What will it take for the UK to wake up and follow suit?
Okay, so the problem that we have in government here is a lack of joined up thinking. So you have different departments almost in opposition. So you have transport department, one element actually building new motorways at the same time as trying to build HS2. And so I think that's the real issue we have. And I think we also need politicians that actually really care. That it is not a photo opportunity, it isn't a way of looking good with other international leaders, and actually will get down and mucky into policy. Because the really interesting thing is, policy is really difficult. To make really good, effective policies, you need good policymakers, you need a bunch of really good lawyers to actually work out how to actually engage and do it. I love the fact, say, building regulations. Building regulations in this country are actually pretty good and pretty sustainable. Except the current government, when they came into power the first time, what they did was they removed enforcement. So what happens now is, if you happen to be a big housing company, you build a whole estate, you have to get it certified. So all you do is you pay another company, your mates, to come along and go, yeah, the windows fit, sort of, tick, 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 tick. Here you are, it's all eco. And of course, when anybody goes along and actually measures those houses, they are poorly built, they are drafty, they basically are not up to code. But there's no enforcement. So having worked with lots and lots of business leaders, and this is one of the questions that I answered when Deborah Meaden asked and said, what can government do? Have really good rules, have really good policies, and enforce them. Because companies don't mind, and actually they prefer that, because then, guess what? When they're doing it right and they're making a profit, they know that somebody down the road who's cheating will get caught out.
Very good. Perfect. Okay, so last one. This is from Sarah. So, question for Mark. Great talk. The scale of the scale of the challenge seems enormous and somewhat intimidating. Where do we as individuals and business leaders start? So, obviously, I know this might have come in just before the end, but is there any sort of, we love a top 3 or top 1?
So the first thing is talk about it. So I have worked with many companies, and what I've always found amazing is it's someone in the company that starts to agitate. And I call them green viruses, which is probably not very PC at the moment. But, and what they do is they just agitate. And they talk to other people, and they go, have you thought about recycling? And suddenly everybody goes, I've been really worried about it. Because what happens is most of us have a bit of climate anxiety, a bit of eco-anxiety, but we don't talk about it because we're English, we're British, we don't talk about things like that. And when somebody opens that up at work, everybody goes, oh yeah, I really like to do something about it. It would be really good. And that actually infects the company. And I've seen companies from the CEO infecting the company downwards. I've seen it in the middle, and I've seen it from the bottom up. And that's not just startup companies I've worked with. I've seen it happen with billion-dollar companies that have gone from, what's the environment, to winning AAA star rating at the CDP. So for me, the most important thing is talk about it within your company, with your friends, etc., because you'll find that everybody just goes, yeah, no, guess what? Yeah, I feel exactly the same. Yeah, let's do something about it. And that's really empowering. That's where change happens. And again, companies are really powerful because they can work so much quicker, faster than government. And the weird thing is, once you actually convince the people on the board that actually it's going to help your company, make sure everybody thinks you're brilliant and ethical, improve sales, etc., they all go, yes, let's save the planet, Mark's right.
Mark's right. 100%.
Of course. That's
Brilliant.
my mantra for the whole of COP26.
No, definitely. Oh, we've just got a question down the front.
Sorry, I studio working. Quick question, Mark, please. I've got a bloody forehead from banging my head against a brick wall. How do you talk to naysayers? Oh, there's no problem. This is all well-off liberal thinking. The naysayers who said no problem. How do you talk to them? Or do you
Okay, so I think there are two different types of naysayers or skeptics, and I split them into honest ones. So there are normal people like you and I who have incredibly busy lives, maybe holding 2 jobs down, trying to get their kids to school on time, trying to do their homework, trying to feed them something healthy, and at the back of their mind they go, planet, save, really. And for those people, it's about the win-win. And you go, well, hang on, if we have electric vehicles in all sort of like cities, air pollution halves overnight, your kids' asthma will be much better. Oh, and by the way, it helps save the planet. At which point they go, ooh, yes, I'm happy to. So I think it's about engaging them in things that matter to them. So those are the honest ones. And most of them are being won over. If you look at the number of people that understand climate change and believe it's happening now in this country, it's huge. And then, I step over here, they're the dishonest ones. Those are the ones paid by fossil fuel companies, paid by certain lobbying groups, and they will basically just start to agitate and go, yeah, you're probably right, but it's going to cost us a lot of money. What about the poor people? And the thing is, I have gone on the media and gone, I'm sorry, climate change and poverty are 2 different issues. You have decided not to distribute the wealth in this country in a fair way, so that's why we have poor people. We don't have poor people because of climate change. We have poor people because of your decisions and the way you've done it. So don't conflate the 2. Now let's talk about climate change. And they just go, it's like, well, come on, So again, I think you just have to be supportive and look at the angle of what is important in their lives. And then you basically, I'm on camera, I was going to say, shit on a very high height on those paid lobbyists, etc. And you basically point out to people, you go, they're paid by the fossil fuel companies. And guess what? People know things like that. They can smell frauds a mile off. So I think that's the way you deal with it. Sorry, that was a very long answer for a short question.
No, not at all. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Mark. Bit of a round of applause for Mark. Okay. So I would now like to welcome up the panel. So we've got Gabby from Three-Sided Cube who's going to be moderating it, and I'll let everyone else introduce themselves. So welcome up the panel.
Really thought about where we're sitting, so just go for it, guys. Take a seat. Great. Well, while everyone gets themselves comfortable, I will do a little introduction. So as Shah so kindly mentioned, I'm Gabby and I head up commercial at Three-Sided Cube, which has kind of been introed already. And I guess just a bit of kind of context around my role. I'm constantly talking to change makers like yourself. I have the very privileged role of speaking to people about the amazing projects that they're looking to do, which are going to change lives for the better. And I'm kind of gatekeeper of our mission, which is that everything that we do to find the right projects that our teams can then take through and deliver into the amazing solutions that we have out in the world today. So before we get you introduced to everyone else on the panel and can start diving into the topics that we're here to talk about today, just a quick reminder, as Shah said, to keep putting those questions into Slido. We will leave time at the end of the panel discussion to answer those questions. But also, everyone in the room, as we've seen already, please do ask questions and talk to us. We will be really looking forward to discussing your questions more. So I guess everyone knows Rich by now, so we can skip him, right? Yeah, that's cool. Cool. So Anna, would you like to kick us off with an intro?
I'm Anna Wicks. I work for Dr. Martens, so I'm a Sustainability Senior Project Manager there. And Dr. Martens, if you don't know them, make kind of boots that look like this. They're kind of an iconic, in my opinion, British footwear brand. We make about 12.7 million pairs of shoes across about 60 countries, but really focused on kind of durability, timeless design. Like, this is the same design from a construction and aesthetic perspective as the first boot that was made in 1960. So that's Dr. Martens and me.
Thank you.
Ella?
Hi there. So my name is Ella Schoen, and I'm the founder of Top Up Truck, which is a mobile zero-waste shop and zero-waste delivery service. And the idea of it is to make it easier for people to shop without plastic packaging by taking the zero-waste shop to their homes and to kind of bridge the gap between convenience and sustainability.
Amazing. Priscilla?
Hi, can you hear me? Gosh, I'm usually really loud anyway, so this should further help me boost my voice. Hi, I'm Priscilla. I am the head of community and social media for the AZ app. So if you don't know what the AZ app is, we're an app that helps you track the carbon footprint that's attached to your purchases. So it's a really cool app. I know I'm biased, but it is. It's great because it gives you further insight into, like, for example, when I first joined the company and I connected my bank account, I realised that Deliveroo had become my best friend throughout the lockdown. And also things like, you know, if you shop a lot at like Zara, it kind of like gives you insight on stuff like that. So fantastic app for giving you insight, which I think is really, really important when we're having conversations around climate change.
Brilliant. And Paul?
Yeah, here on that, actually, Yeezy is amazing, so do download it. But yeah, my name's Paul, and I'm the founder of Umelia. We're a company that provides technology for sustainable futures within the hospitality and food and beverage sector as well. And actually, what you realise is when you work in food and beverage, and anyone that has worked in hospitality, is there's probably 6 pages of A4 on the problems of waste and what those kind of gaps look like. I was very lucky to work for quite a big company, Fuller Smith & Turner, and we were easily accessible to data that allowed us to look at what that wastage was like. But actually, within hospitality, within pubs, within a really old industry, a lot of people don't have access to that data. So we're very lucky to sort of develop some technology around that to be able to minimize wastage gaps when it comes to food, when it comes to portioning, and the things that we're working on right now with packaging, and hopefully packaging up a better future. So yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you all so much for introducing yourself. And I think following on from what Mark was saying, you know, it's great to have a room full of change makers here, but it's great to have sort of representatives from brands here, but also kind of like entrepreneurs that are making those steps to make real changes. So I guess we've had a lot of kind of conversation in the intros about the kind of gap, particularly looking at consumers, that gap between intention and action, and had a chance, I think Rich was going through some of those barriers, those particular ones in terms of costs, motivation and convenience, and that really fed into what Mark was just talking us through. In terms of as brand representatives, businesses, as people that have seen problems and actively gone out and strive to battle through and come up with solutions to that, kind of what are the barriers you've seen that you've had to battle through? Anna, from a sustainability perspective at a brand, what are those?
Yeah, I mean, I would say a really big one is complexity, and I think everyone has touched on this, but there's just no clear, this is the best option to go after. So an example from in a previous role, actually, when I was at Sainsbury's and looking at packaging, a lot of retailers had changed over their fruit and veg bags to paper, because it was around the time David Attenborough was making us aware that plastic maybe wasn't so good, especially if it's single use. And so there's a lot of pressure to move over to paper bags. It seems like a really simple solution, fantastic. Looking more into it, actually, the carbon footprint and the water footprint from switching to the paper bags was significantly worse. And it actually made me laugh when Mark was saying about the changing to trains, you know, was not necessarily the most effective thing from a carbon perspective, because I think it's just that lack of information that it's very hard to know. It's so easy to get drawn in by the kind of marketing of, oh yes, that's the better option. There's so much greenwashing these days as well, and there's a very exciting new legislation called the Green Claims Code. If you haven't heard of it, I would look at it. It's very exciting, basically stopping greenwashing, hopefully. And I think going back to the kind of packaging piece, there's also things around, you know, biodegradability and them not being very, you know, they don't always degrade. Are they ever going to actually be degraded at home, or are they going to go into the plastic waste stream, which is quite problematic as well, because then it makes the, you know, recycled plastics less stable and more virgin needs to be used. So it wasn't on the surface as easy a solution as it seemed, and I think it's that kind of complexity from a brand perspective that's quite hard to get around. And then as a consumer who has only a fraction of that information, how do you then work out what's truly best? I think is a really, really tricky one.
Yeah, that's really interesting in terms of that complexity. Also, Ella, with what you've done, you know, it would be interesting just to hear a bit about the driver of why you started Top Up Truck, and then the barriers you've experienced as a kind of new brand, if you like, bringing that through. Was there barriers to support, to, you know, drumming up support from consumers, or was it something that was really responding to something that people needed?
Yeah, so in terms of what I was initially addressing, I myself found that even though I'm quite sustainably minded, I wasn't actually getting myself to the zero waste shop because there's a co-op on the way home and I was commuting, and it was just, it was something that the intention was there, but I just wasn't actually kind of going sort of 20 minutes out my way with my containers on a Saturday to kind of go and do that. So I kind of responded to my own need there, but then also, obviously the customer base that I've built up since then has responded really well to it, and it's kind of got more people involved in zero waste that wouldn't have been otherwise because of that sort of convenience thing. But in terms of what you're asking about, the sort of other challenges, I mean, I think complexity is a big one. There is sort of selling in, we sell in kind of unfixed increments because people shop in their own containers, and having the tech to support that, so people kind of, like, it makes ordering and kind of using, it makes ordering online really, really complex, and that whole sort of thing about the kind of user journey and the sort of back-end operations, it's quite difficult to then do something that works and is really continuous and really scalable. So that's one of the main things.
It's really interesting. And Priscilla, as Yeezy's breaking that down, making it easier for people to understand their impact, is the barriers similar in terms of when you first started, when you were first emerging as a brand?
Yeah, definitely, for sure. I think it's, I can speak more from a community perspective as well, which is quite interesting because we're dealing with human beings. And I think sometimes we think that there's like this blueprint for how people should approach sustainability or, live a more eco-friendly lifestyle. And we've got to be mindful that we're all very different. Some of us here have kids, some of us have pets, some of us are single, live by themselves. It varies from person to person. So one of the things I'm doing is kind of trying to add that human element to it, to say that, like, we're not judging you and saying that, like, the way you're living, oh my gosh, you terrible person, because I do think sometimes people feel like they're not worthy enough to be part of the conversations around climate change. And really and truly, every single person in this room has to be part of that. So there isn't like an entry or like you're right to speak on it and you're not. And so I think it's stripping away that filter of judgment, right? And also being able to break down why people are feeling the pressures, whether that's anxiety reasons, whether it's, again, accessibility, if we've discussed as well, but also being able to say to people that you can start where you are, which is something I always say. Like, it doesn't look like me, it doesn't look like you, it looks like you. So wherever you are, start there and then work, your way up or out of that way. I mean, even if we look at like fast fashion, for example, we always talk about it as like, stop shopping here, shop more sustainably. But it's not that easy because shopping isn't just about buying clothes. It's also quite a social activity. A lot of us will meet our friends and go shopping. A lot of us go out with our parents or whatever it is, just to shop, to be social. So this is about changing behaviour and saying that, like, there are other things that you can do to be more social that maybe are less detrimental to the planet. So I think it's complex because we're humans. And I think because everyone's part of that conversation, it's like, how can we really make everyone feel that they can be part of it?
I think that's really interesting, and some nice common themes we're seeing already. Everyone who knows me knows I love a theme. Paul, what are your barriers as someone that's specifically come from an industry and obviously seen a huge problem with that industry?
Yeah, I think for me, I think Mark actually touched on it a little bit earlier, and for me it's more about the motivation side of things, changing that behaviour. And as Mark said, I think for me as well, the biggest and most important realisation that I've had when you lead big teams and you're trying to change these big teams in hotels that you're leading, you're trying to get everyone to move in one direction, is that people are far more likely to change their behaviour and act if they have their own reasons for doing something. And we all believe that. And actually, persuasion isn't about this kind of hypnotist, magical thing that we do to get people to change, people to act in a different way. What we're actually doing is we're trying to change the context of a situation so that they summon their own reasons for doing something. And actually what we really need to do within sustainability is, yes, we can show them images of floods and fire forests and things like that. And that will, scaremonger some people maybe, but if we can change the context a little bit to say that actually we could do it in a slightly different way and find their reasons for doing it, like Mark touched on earlier, then we might see far more act and far more change from it. So motivation to me is the biggest barrier and probably could lead the most change between everyone. And actually, if we look at kind of the most downloaded apps of today and why they work so well, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, is actually this kind of community that your friends are doing something similar to you. You know, you go on like your reel, it's for you as a person. If I grabbed like Gabby's Instagram today and went on it, I wouldn't be interested because it's her friends and it's her reels, right? Because the products are for her. Whereas realistically, if I can develop an app that allows us to basically see what our friends are doing or allowed to see what good sustainability stuff you are doing, then I'm far more likely to take part in that community. And that's what sort of we're trying to find that motivation for that.
No, I think it's a really interesting point, and in terms of that human element, as Priscilla said, you know, and that community aspect, in terms of convenience and complexity, there's a lot there to unpick in terms of why there's these barriers for people, but also how you can actually start to break them down with some sort of solutions in terms of the things that we'll be talking about next. Rich, if I ignored you, I feel like it would be horrendous of me and you would never forgive me. So in terms of the stuff you're talking about with the report and everything, does that resonate in the same way?
Certainly from a barriers point of view, and I kind of talk from the experience we've had with dealing with brands and the clients that we've got trying to make a difference. I think the complexity thing is absolutely key to it. We're just looking at a project at the moment that's all about how ethical ingredients are in cosmetics and how we can surface that kind of stuff. And there's a whole world of, you know, how do you get to the point where you know that? And actually, the big challenge there is the complexity of the data and how you can aggregate that data. And what it really comes down to, though, as well, is it's an issue of trust. So who is the trusted people? Who are the authorities? You know, we've had, it feels like decades now of just trust in our big institutions being eroded, and you don't know who is it the person that, like, okay, we'll listen to Mark now, because he sounded good this morning, right? So
yeah, he did.
Mark's your guy. But you can look at a wealth of information and brown paper bags are good, no plastic bags are better because of it, or it's really difficult to pick your way through. So that complexity is a really tricky one. And then the other one I think is a really key one, is that people understanding the impact of actually what they're doing, because it's the biggest driver for change. We sort of touched on it earlier on, because actually, great, you've taken a ton of carbon out of the air. That sounds like a lot. Is it a lot? I don't know if that's a lot. You know, and we've worked on a project where we're trying to, Joel's, is that there now? We worked on a project where we were trying to explain to people, giving them challenges to behave more sustainably, and then showing them that you know, you've taken this much carbon out of the air. It's hard enough doing the calculation, but then showing what the impact of that really means. Wow, we did some mental gymnastics trying to show that, like equivalent weight in flamingos and that kind of stuff. It was really like out there, but that's a real challenge as well, I think. In this space.
Yeah, in terms of surfacing that impact to drive that motivation.
Yeah, showing what it does.
I was just going to say that something that hasn't been kind of mentioned, which is a big sort of prohibitive factor, is cost. And I think a lot of the problem, kind of on Rich's point, comes from not having that sort of understanding, as well as benchmarking, but also not having that understanding of true cost. And I think people don't really understand that, you know, there is going to be a compromise, whether it's between welfare, between sustainability, or actually paying a little bit more. When people kind of understand why it is that certain prices are so low and why it is that certain prices are higher, then they'd be more inclined to sort of support businesses and producers that are kind of actually doing the right thing.
Absolutely, and I think, you know, what Rich is touching on and everyone on the panel is touching on in terms of our experience is a lack of transparency, and there's no one forcing transparency in this area. So I suppose around the costs for someone like yourselves, who are being very transparent around the costs and around the sustainability, when you're paired with brands or products that don't have to be so transparent and can sell at a reduced cost, there's a competitiveness there that doesn't seem like it's based on the fairest of positions. And I suppose we've mentioned around greenwashing, you know, it's a whole thing to navigate as a consumer, because you see something that sounds so good and you think it's acting so sustainable, but because there isn't that transparency around all the different other areas of even when you move outside and you look more on the ethical stream, you know, there's lots of brands that say they're doing a lot in climate, but can be really awful to people. And there's so much unethical things in supply chain. So that lack of transparency around everything for a consumer is quite difficult to navigate as well, which I think is the point people are making a lot around here. So in terms of, we've gone into some of these complexities and some of these barriers. I feel like we probably need Shah another 3 hours to get to the bottom of this. So, you know, warning you now. But, you know, in terms of what action is needed. So I think, you know, in terms of, we know there's lots of problems. What real action is needed, whether that's as a brand perspective or kind of more wider, like what's going to be a big driver to make sure some of these things are changed and real action is seen? Anna?
Yeah, I think it was touched on earlier about everyone needing to do their part, whether it be a brand or a consumer or the government. I think the other kind of groups, I think investors have quite a key part to play as well. Yeah. And that again comes around to what the consumer do and them having much more power than I think you think. And I think it's really interesting of not just everyone doing their part, but everyone doing their part together and understanding what is happening as a kind of ecosystem. So I was in a really interesting meeting last week about this new potential legislation called Right to Repair, which is actually for white goods, which is not what DMs is going into, but there's thinking about bringing it for textiles as well. And essentially it's giving people the right to repair. This would be for white goods, and so, you know, if it broke after 5 years, instead of having to buy something new, the company would have to help you repair it, which is fantastic, and from a sustainability perspective is wonderful. So we're having this kind of cross-industry group with kind of BRC, DEFRA, lots of different brands, etc. there. And the more we kind of got into the detail, it was really interesting to see, you know, some of the retailers were saying, well, you're asking us to hold a kit of parts for all these different components, for all of these different kind of different products that we sell for 10 years after discontinuation. What's going to happen at the end then? They're just going to go in the bin. And actually, it's not an insurmountable problem, but it's just that the details of these kind of, even when new legislations come in with the right spirit, it's how do you then work as a community and say, well, this is the spirit, we all agreed we want to get there, but what are the complexities and how are we going to work through those so that can actually be achieved rather than it kind of having unintended consequences, which I thought was quite interesting.
Yeah, really interesting. And shows that real need of everyone to collaborate. It's not kind of one piece of the puzzle, it's that need to bring everything together. I mean, that's very much something I hear you speak about a lot, Rich. Does that resonate with you?
The collaboration thing.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. Because it is, you know, that what's interesting as well is the cross market stuff where you guys are obviously looking at that and you can take parallels from it as well. I think it's really, that's always a very good fertile ground for understanding how you can change stuff, particularly in the for good world actually. Because if you look at, you know, pardon my French, but if you look at what all the bastards are doing, they're very good at extracting money and extracting value and changing people's behaviours. You know, so it's, although you often want to be like, oh, they're the worst, there's a lot you can learn from that and take a lot of those tips and tools and techniques, but use it for good. There's a whole thing on the ethics of design that I could talk about for hours, but I won't. But it's a really interesting area. So it's very often that in the for good world we kind of go, no, they're the devil, we won't deal with them. But actually, you can learn a lot about how to you know, how to make people behave in positive ways from them.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think there's often a sector thing. You know, myself, having been in the charity sector previously, often you can be quite insular as a sector and look at what your sector's doing well and what you can learn for, rather than actually looking outside your sector and being like, actually, different way of doing it, but that could be put across different sectors and learn from. So that's a really interesting point. Ella?
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of the government needs to lead a lot more by example and actually just kind of speed things up a lot quicker in terms of forcing companies to act in a sustainable way. I mean, we've got the plastic tax coming in April next year, which is obviously a bit of a step in the right direction, but isn't, you know, there are loopholes with that, and it's kind of, I think it's just introducing 30% of recycled plastic is the rule. But yeah, we kind of need more things like that so that companies actually start putting sustainability at the forefront of the agenda. And then in terms of sort of what we can do is, as businesses and as individuals, is to kind of is to kind of lobby and is to make our voices heard and to kind of collaborate.
That's really powerful. Paul?
Sorry. Yeah, I was just going to mention, I think government is definitely a far more interesting topic. I mean, if we look at the second most downloaded app within the UK last year, it was government-led. It was the NHS Track and Trace. Yes, COVID is far, but whether it was good or not is a completely different matter. But
Don't get him started.
it was government-led and it was downloaded. People were on it, at least. People were interacting with it. And that's what we're looking for, is we're looking for that sort of neat thing. And yes, I think that they could do more, definitely, to be able to at least get us on a platform, at least get us on somewhere or doing something to start. It can evolve. We made the NHS Track and Trace app probably far too quickly, rolled it out really quickly, and it didn't work for the best of times. But we could definitely do something, and they could definitely just start somewhere. And I think that's what it's all about.
It's a really interesting point because, pre-COVID, the thought of staying inside my house for a long period of time without seeing anyone, without, having anywhere to go or do would have been completely alien. And, people do have the power to rally behind a cause when it's made really important to you and your loved ones. So it's a really interesting point in terms of that kind of driver and needing that kind of same sense when it is the threat that we're facing at the moment. Priscilla, in terms of action, obviously, Yaizy's taken quite a lot of action empowering people in terms of being able to track and make changes. So what other actions do you see needed?
Yeah, so obviously I agree with everyone. Governments, corporations, there's so much more they can do. But I think from a personal level as well, it's important for people to realise that people have power. And I think sometimes as humans, it's easy to just kind of deflect that responsibility and say, governments do it. But even if we look historically, right, let's just go back to what quite recently. We talk about the Black Lives Matter movement and people actually having the conversations that need to happen around diversity, inclusion, and actually some of the horrific things that were happening around the world when it comes to people of colour. It's like, if we don't have the important conversations as people, then nothing gets done. And we've got so much more power than we like to believe. Or even let's go further back and look at the suffragettes who stood and said, no, I'm a woman and I can do it too. It's like, it can happen. So I think if people just say, I know it's difficult, especially with the comprehension, as you were mentioning there, having to put the equivalents down, which is something that Yaizy, our app, does. So when you go on the app, we try and say, I don't know, your carbon footprint this month is like 20,000 cups of tea. Obviously, it's difficult to maybe imagine, but this is a little bit of a step in the right direction when it comes to comprehension, because I think that's the difficult thing. You talk about kg and everyone's like, oh, straight over my head. But what does that mean to me, right? What is that? So maybe if you put it down as like 20 Gucci bags, someone might gasp a bit more than they would if it was like kg. Or if you put it down as like 100,000 Lucozade bottles, it's easier for you to comprehend than when it's, as I said, something like kgs or like very industry-specific terminology is being used. So comprehension plays a massive part, but people need to realise that, once you've got that information, there is so much you can do. There's so many communities that you can join that will help you. And then obviously, there's apps like Yaizy that are fantastic and can help you just understand your own personal impacts. And then I think from there, it's for you to then decide, like I said before, where can I start?
Yeah.
Like, what's the easiest way I can start? And then what you find is you start one thing and then it rolls over. So if we talk about like trackers, because that's what that's tracking technology, I mean, they work. We look at things like Fitbit, we look at like MyFitnessPal. So if you have a goal that you want to achieve when it comes to your fitness or you want to move around more, you download apps like that and then they help you understand it. So for those people especially that are keen on data, I think apps like Yaizy are helpful for that because it gives you the numbers. And that way you can look at it and say, oh, that's what that means, and then take action.
It's really interesting, the actual thing, and a couple of you have mentioned it again. And when we started doing this Bridging the Gap stuff, we're doing events like this, and we've got a podcast stuff, and we talked to a lot of people about how we think the thing you can do. And the one thing which really surprised me that a lot of them said was, actually, it's protest. You should be protesting, because voting, unfortunately, is a wonderful thing, and you should vote. It's too late. We haven't got time to wait for another election cycle to be able to start action on this. And actually, that thing of the two most powerful things are your vote and the pound in your pocket. Well, the vote thing, really, to force any change politically at the moment, you're going to have to get out there and protest. And it's interesting seeing that happening more and more and more around kind of, almost the cladding issue and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of incredible. But I was quite surprised at that, to be honest. From you know, and it was. It's just a really interesting thing. It made me think about it as well, that, you know, maybe I should be doing that. Maybe I should get my placard out rather than just talking about it all the time. But I think it's that step on. But I also, that pound in your pocket and brands sort of not holding them to account, but, you know, whether you like it or not, corporations are a part of the world. That is it, unless we're going to dismantle capitalism. But again, we don't really have time to do that. So corporations are going to matter, and they will listen to where you spend your money. That's what they are beholden to, unfortunately. So, you know, that's a really key one, to seek out those trustworthy brands that are trying to do the right thing.
And I think, one really quick thing on that is, I think people don't realise the power, how many times in a brand, or if you work in brands, you probably do, but there'll be like one TikTok video that's gone viral of another brand, I won't call out who it is, but has destroyed loads of stock that was perfectly good very recently, and it's gone around everyone, and it's really like, are we definitely sure? We know our policy's against this, but our store's definitely not doing this. Like, and it really sparks action, and I think that one little thing that you do can really, you might not see the consequences, but it really can. And so, I mean, I completely agree with your point. I think people have so much more power than they think.
They really do.
I think there's also an element in empowering people, which I think is what, Priscilla, you've been saying in terms of that community-led, but also like taking steps and feeling okay to take steps, even if they're not as huge as you feel they could be in terms of a place to start. So I think that's a really interesting point. And I know that we've got other questions we could talk about, but Shah was doing her amazing look at me, that there's been lots of questions coming through, which is what we love to hear. So I think what we're going to do is start diving into those questions so we can get through as many of them as possible while we've still got our amazing panel here. So I'm just going to start at the top, Shah, so you know, just nudge me if you've done these already or there's anything else. So we've got one here, which is, how effective really is carbon offsetting? How many trees can you effectively plant, notwithstanding the time it takes for one to truly offset the carbon? So I feel like I'm looking at you, Priscilla.
I was like, damn it. To me, right. So it's not the solution. So I never want anyone to ever think that Yeezy's ever proposing it's the solution. In fact, it's not the part of our business that we push so much. We really do stand for behavioural change. That's our thing. We think if we give you the insights, then you can change. But it's also not to suggest that they're not effective, because they are. Again, not the answers, but also they are effective. So with, I think the issue is with certain, there are certain projects that are not as impactful. So this is around us making sure that whatever projects we attach ourselves to, that they are certified, that there's been enough testing around them, that we know that they're actually doing what they claim to do. Because there has been numerous cases, and I'm sure they know, where someone said, oh, you know, we plant trees for you, and everyone asks the same question, I mean, how many trees can you bloody plant? It's like, are we going to keep planting trees forever until one's growing on my head? It's like, we have to actually be realistic. This is not the firm solution, but it's part of the change. So it's for us to really understand the projects that we're working with. I mean, we're rejigging a lot of the stuff that's happening in-house so that we can use a lot of the better carbon offsetting.
You've lost them now.
I know, but yeah.
They're getting on really, guys. You're going to have to help me.
But yeah, it's just for understanding more about what they do, being able to actually see it, being able to have like a representative there that you can speak to, and have, you know, that open line of communication with the projects that you assign. So no, it's not the solution, but it helps with that little bit that you know, we do all have unavoidable emissions. Let's not pretend like we don't. We're human. We're moving around. Even getting here today, God knows what that's going to look like on the app. It's like, it is there, right? So there is stuff that we can't avoid, but for the stuff that we can, for the stuff that's unavoidable, let's fix it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think in terms of, personally for me, it helps understand where I can reduce as well. So I think in terms of a stepping stone, it's something, again, more tangible to say, look, that's something I could have not done. Yes. And although I'm offsetting it now, it's about that understanding. And again, those baby steps in a journey. So there's something really powerful there. Getting quite a lot of like questions for individuals. So, you know, feel free to chip in if it's anyone else's, but this is specifically for you, Anna. What is Doc Martens doing in their supply chain and product design to increase the sustainability? And why did they scrap their For Life range?
Two great questions. So we've actually just announced 2 months ago a new set of sustainability commitments. So we're going to be net zero by 2030, which obviously has massive implications across the supply chain, amongst lots of other different things. We've also committed another really exciting one, I find personally, is to have fully sustainable materials by 2040. And what that means is not just at the moment, at the moment, most of our leather is from Leather Working Group tanneries. I think almost half of that is from gold rated, which is the best leather in the world. So in a way, you could say, oh, well, it is more sustainable than than other footwear. However, that's not truly sustainable because you need to look at everything kind of end to end. What's the end of life? What's the input chemistry? There are so many different elements. And so at the moment that we're starting to define exactly what that looks like and how we're going to get there. So I don't know if that answers your question, but we are doing a lot. And I think, I will leave it at that. On the end of life one, so I would say watch this space. There's some really exciting things going on at the moment, especially in the kind of second-hand repair for resale type area. I think apps like Vinted and Depop, kind of peer-to-peer resale apps, are really exciting and have really kind of changed the needle on what second-hand looks like and what end-of-life looks like, especially for a brand where maximising the length of the footwear is so core to what we do. So it's about how do you keep these shoes on people's feet for as long as possible, because that's one of the most sustainable things you can do. The best purchase is kind of no purchase, right? So really maintaining the life of your footwear is what we want to be doing. So I'd say watch this space.
Just on that, how does, as a brand, the best purchase is no purchase? How?
Just that.
Yeah, I mean, it is a great question. And I think I've thought about this a lot personally, and I think about kind of retailers like Amazon, where people buy in such volume from, there's very little kind of regulation and accountability as to the sellers on Amazon, for example, not specifically calling it Amazon, but around what they're then doing, what their supply chains are like. So if you are a brand and you have a truly sustainable, which we're obviously not there yet, but if you have a truly sustainable product and truly sustainable end of life, and you're ultimately carbon positive, then you're going to be doing the good thing. So I think that's where you can look at how volume can do good. Because if your brand is truly doing good, then why not scale it?
Right, okay. But then when everyone's got a pair, and that's it.
Well,
we're all done.
Then everyone's happy.
Everyone's happy. Exactly. No more shoes.
Something to think about. Ella, I've got one here for you. So aside from cost, what is the biggest blocker for zero waste groceries?
There's a few. What's the biggest blocker? I mean, I think we, as I kind of touched upon earlier, the sort of the tech side of things. I mean, we're kind of bridging a gap between convenience and sustainability, and kind of with that, by being mobile, but with that, there's a kind of whole host of other sort of barriers that we come up against in terms of how people can locate us, in terms of how we actually do a sort of community shopping experience, and so it's kind of like how do we actually group people together in things like that. What was the actual question?
I've moved it now, but I think it was apart from cost, what's the biggest barrier to zero waste groceries?
Yeah, so in terms of so it's kind of technology, really, and kind of and also just kind of convincing people as a small business, it's really hard to have access to data to do that sort of demonstrate that true cost, and to kind of do sort of life cycle analysis of what you're doing. So I guess it's just sort of having access to that big data and to the benchmarking to be able to prove that what you're doing just to the non-early adopter is indeed really valuable and really important.
Brilliant. Thank you. So one here, what design tool from the world of nudge techniques should be used more to encourage consumer behaviour? And I'm just going to hope someone takes that.
The world of nudge. I mean, the world of nudge. There's a whole. I mean, really, there's kind of, if you look at sort of nudge techniques and how they affect consumer behaviour, it's almost the whole, the whole suite. So, gamification's a really massive one. That reward mechanism piece is a really huge one as well. So it does depend on the type of behaviour that you're trying to change. I think a really interesting one in the work. So if you take just a subset, so we should eat less meat because it's bad for the planet, right? If you look at the value exchange for an individual there, you can go onto Netflix and watch your documentary about how meat is terrible for the planet and it's killing the planet. Okay, and people that care about the planet, that might affect them. But for the people that are like, I like steaks, it might not affect them as much. Whereas you've got another documentary, which the name of it has just disappeared from my head, but it's all about how athletes that go meat-free perform better. So it's better for your body.
Game changers?
That's it. That's the one. There you go. Better for your body, better for you to go vegan. That gives me a reason why I would do it. Oh, well, I'm personally going to be better off for that. So it's just a different value exchange. So it's understanding that and nice. Showing the value to the individual is kind of a really key one. But nudge is that whole world is rife for behaviour change, and there's no sort of one specific one you would pick out. It's always used in a suite of tools, really.
There's an interesting question which follows on nicely from what we were talking about. It might be quite a quick one to answer because I think you've touched on it slightly there already, Bitch. But we talk about behaviour change in terms of positive action and getting that dopamine hit. But how do we motivate to take less action? Buy less, travel less. So it's quite an interesting one. I mean, you touched on it slightly there, but I suppose rewarding often comes from doing and that repetitive doing in terms of buying less.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like the reverse of your Fitbit. So, I can look at my steps and go, oh, wow, I've done nothing. That's amazing. I quite enjoy that. I've watched hours of TV. That's brilliant. But yeah, it's the same. As I said, it's the same kind of thing. It's showing you the value of doing it and how you do that. That's what, from a consumer, individual, everything we know in terms of designing experience to give to people. What value do they receive from it? So if there's value I receive from doing less, tell me that. Explain it to me and show it. You have to show it in a variety of ways. Just sorry, on the nudge thing, there is one particular one and a particular technique called defaulting, which is what Mark referred to earlier on when he talked about Finland and how they default to the sustainable free option. Defaulting is incredibly powerful. It's an incredibly powerful tool. People like the illusion of choice, so they might be more attracted because they feel like they've got a load of choice. When they actually come to it, the vast majority will pick the default option. So that is actually one that I would pull out and say is really key. If we can offer someone the sustainable version, they won't necessarily, the power of just picking the easiest one to pick will often overpower the cost and all the rest of it.
There was a lot of questions, so I'm just going to keep rattling through. So you all mentioned collaboration, which we did. What do you think we need to do to build our own personal skill sets to get better at this? So I think that's a really interesting one in terms of collaborating much wider. Is there any thoughts? I mean, for me, things like this are great. Bringing people together from different sectors is something we really value. We've seen real value in that. And actually getting good at connecting other people. So, just because today you're meeting each other, connecting them with someone else as well is really the most powerful thing I always think you can do is that. That would be one for me.
I would say another one is just don't assume the answer is going to be no. So people that work in sustainability generally go into it because we're really passionate about it. And so when one of the projects that I've been looking at, which links to the repair question, that hopefully we'll be launching later this year, some other retailers have done it. And my instant reaction was the kind of brand, if they're a competitor, don't get in touch. But then I did, and they were so open, and now we're working together on different research projects as well. There's just some really exciting things that have come out of it. So I would say, don't assume. People that work in this space are generally quite open, and it feels like we need to change things together. So don't assume that you need to be insular.
Anything?
Yeah, I think, like you said there, for change to happen, we need to be a skill set that I think is to be a bit more original, be an original thinker, because unfortunately if we're waiting around for people to lead us, a lot of the time we could be waiting probably too long. So, try and think outside the box. I was talking about an app that I knew about for 2 years and I didn't use it, and I don't know why, but it was too good to go. I don't know if you guys have heard of that. It's a food wastage app, and it's amazing. I've known about it for 2 years, but I was doing my same thing, and I was just in my routine, and I had to wait around until maybe like 4 or 5 p.m. until I could collect this food from somewhere else. But I had to take that little bit of a leap just to download an app. It seems so simple, and it's really easy to do, and I knew about it for years. But it was just that little bit of like, everyone just take that little step into the unknown. Well, what could this be like if I try this? What would it be like if I changed my habit a little bit? And I think that's what I think could just have a bit of behavioural change if everyone starts to do that little bit at a time. And I think it's really important that everyone have to have their own original thinking and actually think, what would happen if I just take that little bit of a leap, or just change my direction of what I do in my day-to-day life. Maybe it is that reusable coffee cup that you buy, but it will make a massive difference along the way. So it's just that tiny little bit of change, and just taking that leap into the almost like unknown, and make it sound like such a big thing, buying a reusable coffee cup or downloading an app. But it will just affect that little bit of change, and then you'll think, okay, well, this isn't so bad, maybe I can do something else. I think that's really, really important.
100%, yeah.
Sorry, one more thing.
No, go.
I would say for just like everyday people, find your tribe, like find your people where you're at that you feel like you might naturally connect with. So, for example, you're a mother, there's like loads of little groups that do like mothers that walk, for example, and you can go walking and meet other mothers, and that way you develop really like natural, better habits, if that makes sense, without it being forced. If you're into gardening, those are like little gardening communities that you can join, and you can learn a lot more there about, planting more organic fruits and veg, and from then it can like kind of evolve. And also you're connecting with like-minded people, or at least people who you might maybe aspire to be a little bit more like, if that makes sense. If you're into fashion, for example, there's so many like sustainable fashion groups or like vintage fashion groups. Like find your bubble, whatever works for you, and kind of then nurture the skills from there. And I think it's really handy because we can learn a lot from each other. And even online, like there's like Fashion Revolution that you can follow online, who have their own little like online community. Or there was another one that I thought was completely gone. Or Yeezy. I mean, what was it?
Yeezy.
We're here as well.
Yeezy.
You can like follow us, for example, and just learn a little bit more.
Self-promotion.
Yeah, so shameless as well. There are so many like spaces, even like Nextdoor. I know that sounds so like my mother is the queen of Nextdoor. Because she's always on there complaining about one thing or another. And if you don't know what it is, it's the app. It's like a neighbourhood app that connects you to other people within like a certain radius of your area. You can just literally talk about anything. Like, who's setting those fireworks off at 5 p.m? And then everyone gets in and starts nattering. But even on platforms like that, like there is sub-communities there. I was going to say Reddit, but you know what? I'm going to lay off Reddit because they could be a bit sometimes. But there are places that you can find people to talk with and connect with everywhere.
I think that's really powerful. Like, find what you're comfortable with as well. Like, I think anything that you're doing is good. Like, how much you can do. It's not compared to someone next to you. I think it's like, have the confidence to make your steps.
It totally is, and it's interesting that the question of what other skills do I need, and I think what's amazing to hear from you guys, just given the context of where we are today, is that I always am a big advocate for focus on what you are good at, and the stuff that you're not sure about, get help with that. So, and you do that through being transparent with people and collaborating with people and expanding your network, and they really are key. The network effect in any kind of endeavour is absolutely huge. As I say, as today, so it's great to you all sort of say that as well. It's so important.
Amazing. So got one here. So data use is a big environmental problem growing exponentially. E.g., Twitch users alone are producing 1 million tonnes of carbon per year. Is it a tech scandal waiting to happen? I'm looking at the technology expert on the panel with us today, maybe to dive into that.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's kind of, your digital footprint is a real kind of invisible, an invisible part of all of this at the moment. And it's not getting any smaller, and it's growing. And I think personally, from my point of view, it's almost a regulatory thing. What is interesting, I think, in the future, as greener technology comes in, it will be possible to use to have the energy that we need supplied by renewable. But I think you're kind of, you're going to get to a point where your digital footprint should be coming to you with a bit of a kind of health warning, if you like. So the tools and applications that you use, if you look at those big three cloud providers, AWS is like the lion's share of it. Technically, they're fantastic, but from an environmental point of view, not quite so hot. Google tend to be better at it, but none of them are brilliant, if I'm honest, and they use a lot of power. And we're not even going to start talking about crypto.
Yes, no one is allowed to ask any of those questions because he will have to be up here for a long time.
Yeah, it uses a lot of energy, and people need to be more aware, should be more aware of it. That we need to be thinking about it in the same way that you're taking a flight or you're driving your car. Well, I'm using Instagram for 24 hours a day. I don't know why I'm looking at you.
Why is everyone getting on at my Instagram today? It is private, so don't try to follow me. But I've got a few more questions here that hopefully we can try and whittle through quite quickly. So we've got one here. What would you all like to see in terms of outcomes from COP26 that would help your businesses? So I don't know if anyone's got any specific thoughts, if we want to rally through any key ones.
I personally think some sensible. What would help a business? I think some sensible, real regulation to actually come out of it would be good. Some actual proper policy. Personally, love a target. Targets are great, but target. It's what people are actually doing about it, and that means taxing and laws and regulation and deeper and harder regulation. And it's quite an anathema for a kind of technology company, innovation type, to sort of talk about regulation and the importance of it. But I genuinely feel like, okay, this needs some quite, to make that kind of real change that we need to make, they're going to have to come down quite hard, and it's going to be quite painful for a lot of organisations. But I think there's going to need to be a bigger push from the top. We can go from the bottom up, but really, that's what I'd like to see. Whether I believe that will happen is.
Yeah, no, sorry, I was just going to put in there. Yeah, I agree completely. I think enforcement on those problems that we're causing, and particularly with the bigger companies, and actually seeing that enforcement. Publicise it.
Absolutely.
Publicise it in the press or whatever it might be to get your point out there. That actually this is going to have problems if you do that. If you have that action, it will cause this effect, and we will have this, this placed upon you. And I think that's really important, because as soon as one person sees it, they go, "Oh, well, actually, we don't want to. We better not do that, because actually it could lead to this, and that happened to this person." And then, before you know it, you get in that situation where everyone's feeling, far more. Well, we kind of have to do it because you saw what happened to BP. I don't know. We don't want that to happen to us, right? So yeah, some sort of enforcement from it, I think, and actually, real litigation.
Great, thank you. Hopefully that answered your question. There are innovative ways for businesses to reuse their waste products and turn them into resources for other businesses. Do any of you do this? I feel like all I saw was Anna nodding, so my head immediately went there.
Yeah, I mean, and this was to my point earlier, like it needs to be not just brands in an insular and governments in an insular, it needs to be really cross-collaborative. So at the moment, all the scraps that come when we produce our soles, all that goes to another company who make wellies. We're also looking at what we can do with kind of leather offcuts and waste. So all the different kind of elements throughout supply chain, all the waste is a really big part of the things we're looking at in terms of becoming a truly sustainable company and leaving the world better than we found them, which is what our kind of founder, or our CEO, said a couple of months ago when we announced our targets. But I think it is that, how do you pair up, how do you pair up the scraps from our souls? How do you make sure you find the perfect company? And that's where that kind of piece, and I think that's where technology can be a really big help as well, because it can really help facilitate those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got one last question, so I think that's probably my limit before Shah pushes me off the stage. So the last one is, it's disheartening to find out later that action may not have been sustainable, e.g. reusable nappies, washing them. How much evidence is enough to make change? So I think that might be something we can all kind of have a quick opinion on. Do we want to whiz down?
For me, I think it comes back to that trust thing, and you need to trust the authority that's explaining what to do. And I think, unfortunately, at some point there has to be a bit of a leap of faith with it, and it's not always going to be the right thing to do, but 9 times out of 10 you've got to hope it would be. What I don't think people should do is just go and research for themselves. They need to find trusted people that they can take advice from, because I think it can be quite dangerous just to go and listen to the internet as a whole. It's quite a lethal place to do that.
And also finding where that transparency is why the trust is needed, I think, because at one point something is the best approach to doing it, and then knowledge and research are the power with all of this, so then that is going to shift and change. And I would say, yes, it is disheartening, but also the fact that you could have done better is also a big step from where you were before. So try not to punish yourself every time you're not doing enough, because I think that's the kind of behaviour that stops the motivation for change. So that would be my thing.
I would say sometimes that these kind of issues don't sit in isolation, and actually, like for example, I think I read somewhere that kind of using a paper bag, or there's studies that show that using a paper bag is in fact has a higher carbon footprint than using a plastic bag. But actually, sometimes I think you have to sort of have a bit of compromise in one area in order to kind of have a benefit in another area. And as the sort of technology is evolving and the kind of infrastructure is evolving, I think there's certain choices that we have to kind of make to tackle one issue at a time, and then I guess everything around the other issue should hopefully sort of catch up.
Yeah, love that. We've kind of given sustainability a look. So we recently went for a rebrand. So you can see our colours are like neon yellow and like a deep blue, and I'm so happy. We've kind of moved away from the green and like the browns and stuff like that. I think sometimes people just immediately trust colours. So you walk into a store and it's like, that's brown, that's great, eco, and you put it in your basket. So I think a lot of this has to do with education, but let's be honest, people don't really have the time to go and sit down and Google, is this thing that I just bought from Sainsbury's really as good as it should be? So this is where I think some pressure needs to be put on businesses to be way more transparent.
Yeah.
And we also have to be fair when it comes to how we treat these businesses, because it's a process. Like, a lot of these businesses are not going to become sustainable overnight, right? So, but as long as they can open up and talk people through their journey of how they're going to get to that point and how they're adopting more circular models, then maybe people will make the better decisions based on that. So there should be like an enforcement of transparency, I think, so that people can make the right decisions based on like facts, as opposed to just, for example, colours, which is really a really easy way to sway people.
And there's, to give people some hope, I don't know if you've heard of the new, the Green Claims Code, which is, I think, now in place. But basically it means that if you're making any kind of environmental claim on your packaging or on your product, whatever, it needs to meet 6 kind of principles, and that is around, it has to be truthful, it has to be substantiated, it has to consider end of life, it needs to look at not just one area in isolation, there are some others, but it's going to stop things as much, hopefully, kind of greenwashing, and really put brands on a level playing field that are trying to do some good. So a little bit of hope, hopefully.
And what a lovely point to round up on a moment of hope. So look, thank you so much for all joining. I knew this was going to be a panel where I could have sat here all day or all week and talked about all these various issues. So thank you so much. And if you do have any more questions, if you're in the room joining us today, I'm sure our panel are going to be hanging around for the next few hours. So do grab them and continue the conversation, because that is why we're all here. So thank you so much for joining us and sharing today. Thank you.
You may now exit. Do you want to do it, or do you want me to?
Oh, that was us. So, thank you all for that, and thanks to our panel. That was fantastic. So, as we said earlier on, a lot of this has come from the report that we've got coming out, which is Bridging the Gap, which will be in your inboxes tomorrow. Shah? Tomorrow? It will be tomorrow. So you'll be receiving that, and that's got a lot of the information that we've been talking about today. We also have a load of other kind of stuff that we're doing around this as well. I sort of mentioned it earlier on. We've got a podcast series coming out where we're talking to various different people about this very issue. Got to have a podcast these days. When's that coming out, Shah? Round Cop. So a Round Cop. That's going to be coming out. So you'll be able to find out some more information around this really kind of interesting subject as well. So that kind of brings our standing up on a stage and talking at you and the sort of that part of the event to its close. So thanks to everybody that was involved with it. Thanks to the panellists. Thanks to Shah for organising it. But now really is where the real work begins. So what would be great, we've got some food and we've got some cold drinks available, and we've also got some wine as well, I'm told. So we've got the room now for another couple of hours, so what would be really good if you could hang around, because that collaboration is where we're going to make the magic happen. So thank you all, and that's it from me. To the bar.